Hi guys, today we are going to try and understand the difference between autofill and autofit. So I have this quick demonstration here and I'm going to explain what happens, why if I change this to autofit, this is now stretching, and if I change it back to autofill, it now matches the column size of the row below. So I'm going to make some demonstrations here, and I have this very basic thing that you've seen over and over in my previous CSS Grid tutorials. Now, in my previous CSS Grid tutorials, I defined the size of my columns explicitly. So I would do something like grid templates columns and then something like 1FR, 1FR, right? But the reality is, as a web designer, usually you would try and make your design fluid enough or adaptable to different types of content, different size of content if you want. So sometimes you don't even know how many columns to expect. You just want to fit the content that you receive in your layout and make it display as it should. So it's supposed to be fluid enough to get resize, switch to the next row, etc. as needed. So here I'm going to use still grid template columns, and first I'm going to use a repeat function. Then I'm going to use the min-max function. Both of them are covered in previous tutorials. So min-max, minimum, let's set the minimum to 120 pixels and the maximum to 1 fraction of the size. So what happens here? Right now you can't see anything, and the reason for that is I need to add autofill right here. So this just gave us some columns right here, and everything seems to be working as expected. So if you collapse this column, you can see they all get stacked together. If I stretch this, well, they stretch as well. But notice something about the behavior here. I'm stretching. Again, it's like they shrink and they all get attached together, leaving more space on this right side. So in order for you to understand what this keyword does, autofill, which gets applied to each column, I'm going to stretch this a little bit more, somewhere around here. And now let's go into our Chrome DevTools to inspect this element, what is happening. So I'm going in here, DevTools, and you can see this item is 133 pixels in width, plus 16 pixels on the left of padding, plus 16 pixels of padding on the right. So 32 pixels plus 133, that will be 165. And then we have a grid gap here of 16 pixels and another grid gap of 16 pixels, so 132. And then again we have this 165 pixel item and 165 pixel item. So if you combine that together, this explains why our container is currently 527. Okay, you don't need to do the math, but this explains 165 times 3 plus 32, I believe is going to give you 527. So if you look back here inside our grid templates columns, this declaration, we said the minimum width for a column should be 120 pixels. So notice right now we have 527 pixels for 3 columns. If I stretch this a little bit more, we're going to have enough space to have 4 columns of at least 120 pixels in width. So now I'm going to inspect these elements, the elements again, and I want you to pay attention to what is happening right here in that empty space. So if I hover on the container, you can see that it's now drawing, or it's showing us a column or an item. Well, this is supposed to be a column if it was if they were a bit longer, but right now they just look like boxes. Anyway, if I hover on the container, you can see this empty stuff here, which actually is also a column. So what happens is the autofill has automatically allocated some space to that column, but because there's no content for it, it has left it empty, which means these ones are now back to their minimum 120 pixels, and there is this invisible column here which is auto-filled. So that row that you see here is automatically filled by the browser with an empty column, which could be, or in which we could fit another grid column with some content if we had any. So notice if I just copy this here, all right, and I'm going to paste it. Now you can see I haven't stretched anything, and that column is fitting perfectly. So I'm going to remove it. It has disappeared, but the layout hasn't been messed up. All right, it's just an empty space now, which is why when I hover on the container, let me see if I can find the container again. If I hover on this container, it's now an empty grid box, and this continues. So if I stretch this all the way, it's going to keep drawing or saving space for columns that we could use, but it will automatically fill them, and they will remain empty. So let's inspect again the container, and now you can see we have 3 more columns that we are not using, automatically filled. So this is the autofill property. Now here, the topic of this video is autofill versus autofits. So let me use the autofit, and you will see what happens. The width of these columns, because we said the maximum width is 1 fr, so 1 fraction of this size of that row or that grid container if you want, they are now fitting automatically the full size of that container. So they keep stretching if I go here, but if I reach the point where they are too narrow, then that's when they get stagnant. So at that point, there is no difference between the autofill and autofit behavior until there is enough space to fit more columns. But instead of adding more columns implicitly, it's just stretching the columns that we've already defined. And again, these are defined because of these items here. Remember, every direct child element of a container on which we've applied the grids is automatically a grid item. So these here are acting like grid columns, and they get stretched as there is more space in the viewport. So again, quick demonstration here. If I change this to fill, then the space is empty here because we could fit more columns. We're just not using that space. So back to the initial example I had. Where should you use autofill and autofit? Well, imagine you had a layout where you want to display some sort of charts. Now, here I've just added this black background for you to know what is the item and what is not. But actually, I could also remove that right here. Now, imagine you wanted to display some badges for your members, top members or whatever. Now, if you scroll up here, that's why I'm using autofill. If I change that to autofit, these are now stretching. So I'm going to add back the black background for you to see what is going on here. Now you can see that these boxes are now stretching because of the auto fits keyword right here. But if you don't want that and you want them to stack just like what we have in the bottom row here, then that is when you could simply go here and change this to autofill. So it will automatically fill the remaining space with empty grid columns. So that's just a quick example, and I made that because it reminds me of how bleacherreports.com used to display their badges at the time when they still had it was more like free writers, like youngsters were writing for them, and they were displaying badges on their profile and stuff. They were using some sort of logic similar to this. So again, if I shrink this, you can now see that it's all responsive. But if the space is enough, we notice that we could add more, but we're not. So one last example, if I went here, that div, let's say weeks in top 3, another week was in the top 3, I've added a new thing, a new box here with the same content, and it's showing here. All right, so let's say you were pulling some data from database and displaying the badges, it will be a good idea to use the autofill keyword right here. So I hope I didn't lose you or didn't confuse you or stretch this, but I really want you to understand what is going on in the backgrounds and I hope this video clarifies the difference between autofill and autofit in CSS, especially in grid layouts. So if you like this video, please make sure you subscribe, turn on your notifications, leave a comment, and I'll see you next time. Bye.